Well, welcome everybody. I want to welcome you all again. I'm so glad you decided to spend some time with us on a Monday. We were just talking about how we were all pretty much about to burst into flame and melt with this crazy heat later. So I hope you're in somewhere that's cool and you can kind of relax for an hour and join us to talk a little bit more about expanding your recruitment web. So today's session is not just going to be me chatting with you, it's going to be a panel discussion and what we hope to be a pretty informal discussion among you guys in the chat. We can certainly we can unmute if we need to. We wanted to spend this time thinking a little bit about what's already in place to support expanding your recruitment web to really support those ECI and university partnerships. We're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about some specific strategies to do that, and we'll hear from our panelists with what they've done before, what they would suggest, and then we'll wrap up with Rachel Phillips sharing with us some things that are coming in the future, because I felt like with this last webinar it would be more useful rather than me trying to teach a concept around pipeline, pre-service pipelines, to more be talking about how do we keep this conversation going across time, because it's wonderful to have a grant, and to be able to build these kind of capacity, but it's always really important to be thinking about what's going to happen after the work. I would say the work ends, but we don't want it to end. We want this to be an ongoing effort, and I know that there's certainly a need for that. You guys let me know that in your state for sure, and in my state in Virginia there's absolutely a need to. So I invite you to use the chat today. If anybody's joining us late, be sure to fill out the pre-survey in the chat. It'll just click the link. It'll take just a minute or two, and then we'll have another one at the end. But if you feel free to type into the chat and let us know your thoughts and your questions as we move through today, that'll be your voice. And then we'll hear from our panelists and we'll see how we're doing. If you're not able to use the chat and you need to unmute, we can work through that too. So let me introduce myself in case there's anybody joining us who I haven't gotten to meet before. I'm Dana Childress. I work in Virginia. I'm at Old Dominion University, which is kind of near the ocean, about a half an hour from Virginia Beach. I'm an assistant professor and the program coordinator for our early childhood special education program. So this summer, I was literally knee deep in trying to find placements for my early intervention students. They had a short placement this summer. It was the first time we'd ever run the class in the summer. So it was supposed to make things easier for students to have placements this summer, but man, it's a beast on the university side too, getting the memorandums of agreement in place. Like, it just reminded me of all the components of establishing these partnerships and maintaining them across time. The relationship building is super important, and then there's also sort of all of the program specific and university specific like mechanics that have to happen to make all of this work. So I'm sure you guys have experience with some of that in your state too. But because I'm in another state, I wanted to invite panelists for this webinar. I really think of it more as a web discussion. I wanted to invite panelists that have a lot more expertise than I do in how Texas works and what's been happening in your state. So if 3 folks are joining us today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I'm actually going to go left to right on our screen here, and they'll just introduce themselves and then we'll kind of dive in. So Rachel Phillips, do you mind introducing yourself?
Of course. So hello, I am Rachel Phillips. I'm the lead for policy, Medicaid, and billing here with the ECI state office. I'm sure some of you recognize my name from the EIS registry. I started as the EIS credentialing specialist back in 2019. So I do have a lot of experience in that role or with understanding that role. But I also am the one responsible for overseeing our comprehensive system of personnel development. And so university collaborations and retention, recruitment are all such important topics to me. And I'm always really excited to see what's in the future. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks, Rachel. I really appreciate you joining me. Rachel's always enthusiastic about this, and she knows what's going on in your state. So Rachel will be a great person to ask today, because I know, Rachel, when I was listening to the groups over the last year and chatting with the people that were, this was one of the tasks on their plan. Several people said they wanted to know more about what was happening at the state level to help facilitate some of these relationships. So for those of you that asked for that, this is a good opportunity today to hear more about that and to ask your questions. So thanks, Rachel. I'm going to toss it to our next Rachel Moyer-Trimyer. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to see some familiar faces on today, or familiar names on today's webinar. So previously I did work, I also worked for the ECI state office in the same positions that Rachel Phillips worked in. And now my job's changed a little bit from what's on the screen, but I'm a policy advisor for the Chief Program and Services Office at the Health and Human Services Commission, and I've taught the Introduction to Early Childhood Intervention class at the University of Texas at Austin. So, hi everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And I'm sorry I goofed up your title there on the screen.
Oh no, that was my error. Yeah.
No worries, no worries. Well, I love having Rachel here too, because Rachel and I we've facilitated communities of practice together. We've done these kind of web discussions, so it's been great opportunity. We've worked together a good bit. I love it that Rachel has this. She can look at the pre-service pipeline from multiple perspectives, having worked in early intervention, having worked at the state office, having been taught at the university level. So lots of different perspectives. So she'll bring. So thanks for Rachel for being here. And Elizabeth, I'm going to toss it to you next.
And I'll just say hello to everyone. It's nice to see all of you again. I am Elizabeth Beavers. I am the program director for special education at the University of Houston Clear Lake. And I think you know from work on this grant have been involved, and also have tried to partner with several of the various ECI organizations in the greater Houston area. So from everything from having Rachel, correct me, not a contract, a memorandum of
Letter of understanding.
A letter of collaboration.
Thank you. I went totally blank. A letter of collaboration officially to some of the unofficial things that we've done with different entities. So glad to be here today.
So glad you're here. Thanks, Elizabeth, for joining us. I think Elizabeth will bring that current university perspective and some great ideas for how she's teaching students, like what, because I think about part of this work with pre-service pipeline is not even just making the relationships with your web, but also helping find out what your web needs students to be able to do to make students hireable for when they leave. You know, that's something we've heard a lot from our early intervention programs in Virginia, is that they want students to be working with them because they really do see them as potential hires, and they love it when they can work with students because it's like on the job training before they have to get on the job to get trained. So it's great. We can talk about that, like what makes a student hireable and how can we support that. So I want to ask you guys to type into the chat and let us know who you are. Let us know who you are, where you work, like what your role is, and what's your relationship to recruitment and retention. Some of you, I recognize names that we've been on these before, but I'd love to know, are you actively recruiting right now? You're always trying to retain your staff, right? We're always trying to do things to retain them, but let us know if you are there, early interventionists you're trying to recruit? You have other positions open? It's often service coordinators. There's a shortage of service coordinators, I think, everywhere. So just let us know a little bit about yourself in the chat. So if you can share with us a little bit about who you are, what your relationship to recruitment and retention is, that would be awesome. I say, Anisha, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. You're welcome to unmute and let me know. Anisha says she's an ECI director at Tarrant County, and we're always working on recruitment. Yeah. Jessica's here. Participate in initial interviews, currently hiring PT or EIS and your family support service, family service coordinator. Hi, Joanne. Joanne says she's need EISs, motor therapist, speech therapist, a little bit of everybody. Recruit as a management team, so we're all working on recruitment. So you have a kind of a team approach, Joanne, to your recruitment. That's fantastic. Oh, it's good to see another Dana here. Dana says actively always recruiting, looking for OT, EIS, SLP. Joanne's always recruiting for all positions. Okay. And Roxanne participates in initial interviews. That's interesting that folks, several of you are saying you're always recruiting. Ongoing work with recruitment. OT, can have new OT starting today. Okay. Aurelia says, and positions opening for EISs. Christine is always recruiting, even if there's not a immediate need. We know there will be soon, right? So you've kind of got to hold that perspective that this is an ongoing part of your job. And Vanessa says, currently hiring EIS, speech, OT, ongoing recruitment. So I'm wondering with you guys with ongoing recruitment, is this something you always have ads posted for, or is this just something you are always having on your plate that, you know, I might need something in the future? Let me know in the chat. I see another folks talking about initial interviews, looking for, oh, wow. Zeta says 7 vacancies, looking for a little bit of everybody. Has been challenged working with our agency recruiter. Crystal's identifying new ways for retention. And Tara, always want to learn more about retention. Okay. Marisol says initial interviews. So lots of folks knee deep in recruitment, and it sounds like you kind of always are. I think in early intervention, unfortunately, that is the case. There's a lot of turnaround. There's a lot of folks moving between systems, going from one program to the other. So we're going to talk today about how to support those efforts, those things that you guys are doing. And I do think we often think about, because many of us come from education backgrounds, or like Elizabeth and I are both in education, special education types of departments, we think about the EIS perspective, but you've made it clear in the chat, you need those other therapists as well. So how can we build relationships with universities that have folks that could be channeled to your program there too? Joanne says, since the pandemic, we've not had a full staff and lots of growth. Yeah. Thanks, Joanne. So I thought I'd get us started with, I really like this quote I happened across, and it says, if we create networks with the sole intention of getting something, right, the what's in it for us, we won't succeed. We can't pursue the benefits of networks. The benefits ensue from the investments in meaningful activities and relationships. I think this quote is a really important one. I think it's a little hard, though, to wrap your brain around, because our impetus for pursuing networks often is because I need something. I want to get to know people because I need to fill something. And we know from adult learning that we typically pay attention to things and sort of zone in on stuff to fill a need. I think what this quote reminds us of is, while we have those needs, we want to tap into the needs of the other people in our network. And so we can really be working together for those benefits, and they come in the context of relationships and the shared activities. So I encourage you, as we're going through today, to think about, where are those opportunities for that investment? What might that look like? What are you doing now? And my hope for you today is that you walk away from our web conversation with another idea or two to try, to just keep building those networks, since you're already doing that ongoing work in recruitment. Let me check in with the chat. Stella says something constant regarding recruitment and retention. So you're collecting resumes. Should someone express an interest and there are no pronomens? I think that's really wise, Stella, to collect those resumes, be making those contacts, and then loop back when you need to. And Dana says, we tend to keep ongoing ads on our website for the majority of positions. That's a great idea. Rachel Phillips, do you guys have a place on the state website for position openings? I'm just asking because Virginia does. And I know we were just talking about that in Virginia, about how to keep that updated. Is that something that's not something you guys offer at this point?
We don't. We do have our Handshake account, but that is owned by Health and Human Services. So we aren't able to post specific ECI jobs. We do request job postings whenever we go to recruitment fairs.
Okay.
But there's definitely room for improvement.
I think there is with every state. I mean, I know ours is, like we said, we're trying to talk about how to keep them updated. You know, so a program might submit something, but do they always loop back and say, wait, that's filled, or that, you know, now we have a new timeline on that. It's a lot of moving parts there. I see Joanne, you say in chat, we have 3 new people starting today and 2 new students. Well, Joanne, I'm impressed you decided to join us, because you've got a lot going on today in your program. All right, so you guys, this blue yarn may look familiar to some of you if you were able to join us at the summit. When we met back in March, I did an activity with you guys to help us visualize and think about how the connections within our networks can affect program leaders. I mean, you guys are feeling it all the time, how your networks what happens in your network can affect your staff, can affect families. And I think what folks walked away from that was really kind of thinking about the deep level of like stress within your network, and when things relieve, how it affects folks. Sometimes we don't even think about that. So for those of you that weren't there, what this looked like is everybody stood in a big giant circle. I tossed a ball around, folks held a piece of the ball, and then a piece of the yarn, and then I read a story. And when some of our key players in the ball were kind of part of our story, they would pull on the web when there was a moment of stress and release and kind of ease up on the web when like they'd made a connection, or maybe they had a new hire. Some of those things in your systems that alleviate some of the stress when you're feeling this recruitment stress, but also as soon as you hire someone, or like Joanne has 3 new people starting today and 2 students, that's not a low stress day. There's a lot going on in that day. So these webs and these connections sort of certainly ebb and flow. Well, today what we're going to do is we are going to expand on that web discussion. But if you weren't here in the summer or in the March, that's okay. We're going to jump right in, and you'll be right with us. But we're going to kind of expand on that discussion and hone in on some components of that web, especially your local ECI programs, which many of you are directing and a part of, and your ECI state office. Because I heard folks over the last year ask about that. How can we be working with our state office? What else is happening at the state level that's supporting these recruitment efforts, and how can we be a part of that? So that's where we're headed today. I'm just checking in on my chat. Hi, Sharon. She says on the HHSC website, we send those looking for positions working directly with families to the ECI search page so they can find programs in their area. Awesome. So that's good to know how that works. Thank you, Sharon. So we're going to think about these connections. We're going to think about how what's happening at your state levels and your program levels helps build those meaningful activities and relationships to build that investment. So I think I already kind of mentioned where we're headed. So Rachel Phillips is going to share some of the things that are already in place. So we wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page with that kind of grounded knowledge. Then I'll talk a little bit about some components of early intervention leadership and how they relate to strategies you can use for expanding your recruitment web. We'll get a lot of the strategies. I want to invite you guys to put them in the chat, and our panel will share ideas today. And then we'll go back to Rachel to share about what's in the pipeline, some of the activities that are coming up to continue this conversation about recruitment and retention. So that is where we are headed. Thank you, Rachel. She put this city search. This is the ECI search page. Okay, yes. Thanks, Rachel, that Sharon was talking about. So if you guys haven't seen that before, click that link and bookmark it in your browser. Before I move forward, I wanted to give you guys a chance in the chat. When you signed up for this webinar, were there burning questions that you all had that you want to make sure you get an answer to today, or at least throw it out there? We'll see if we can answer it. So if you want to type your burning question into the chat, feel free, and I'll keep an eye on those as we move through our panel discussion. I'm going to go ahead and transition us to Rachel so she can chat about what's in place now, and I'll be watching the chat in case you guys want to type any of your questions in for today. So here we go, Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, hello again, everybody. And so we did want to talk a little bit about what's currently in place. Most of you should be at least somewhat familiar with our letters of collaboration. We currently have 22 letters of collaboration with university programs statewide. But these do specifically focus on programs and departments in human development, child development, and family studies, or early childhood education. And so these are very focused on the early intervention specialist credential, laying out coursework that would meet the minimum requirements, giving information about potential internships, employment, or volunteer opportunities with local ECI programs, as well as information on how to request a presentation for a course in early childhood or early intervention. And then currently we are also working on a recruitment flyer. We don't have a preview ready for that just yet, but we're working on something to be specific to programs. And so we'll go over a little bit later. And we also attend many career fairs and recruitment events. So the ECI state office does attend at least 2 recruitment events per fiscal year. We usually try to find a few more than that. So those do include, career fairs, the Texas Occupational Therapy Association's Texas Physical Therapy Association, and the Speech Hearing Association as well. And before we go to those recruitment events, we send out a contractor vacancy survey. I'm sure you've seen that come through as an information alert. And those do request, whatever open positions that you have. And if you have job postings available to send our way, that way we can show up to that event prepared to talk about specific jobs out in the field. It is often a little easier when we are able to pull a professional from the field to join us to one of those, just to share about your experience or their experience working for ECI. In the next slide. And so, how I mentioned, we do have those 22 letters of collaboration. And the goal of those is just to increase awareness and support students and alumni who are interested in a career in early intervention. And so along with those examples of coursework, the careers and internships, we also provide an overview of the Texas Administrative Code. We add contact information for the local ECI programs to that university, as well as resources that students can use. So we include a link to Making It Work, the Department of State Health Services audiovisual library, and other just great materials and resources that students can use as study material or towards an end of semester project. And so some of the struggles that we have faced, there are some difficulties in finding universities out in rural areas. So there are some issues up in like the Panhandle, out by Wichita Falls, etc. And so we're starting to kind of look into universities on the outskirts of Texas in a different state, or looking into some community colleges as well. So we'll talk more about that later as well. And another struggle with these is they only apply to the early intervention specialist position. So we currently don't have anything tangible like this with any of the programs that license or prepare therapies. So next slide. As I mentioned before, you might be familiar with our existing Working in the Field of ECI infographic. It's really informative. It gives a lot of information, but it kind of fails to address individual program needs. And also sometimes when we're at career fairs or recruitment fairs, we often are confused as the hiring agency. And so people will ask us about job openings and we'll have to kind of lead them to that city search. So we're kind of hoping to gear it more towards specific programs in a possible way. And so moving forward, we do hope to provide a sort of adjustable recruitment flyer. That way each program could modify it to promote their existing vacancies. And we'll talk more about what's in the pipeline later, of course.
Thanks, Rachel. I love the idea of the editable, like an editable PDF or something that folks could use. I'm wondering, you guys can let us know in the chat, do you have some kind of a flyer you're using at your local program level, or can you envision dropping information in and adding to this? Like, what might that look like for you? Because I hear what you said, Rachel, about getting the folks getting confused that you guys might be the ones that could hire them versus when they really need that additional information about that local level program that's nearby.
And I think it would be great just to be able to hand that to them instead of like, oh, go to this website later.
Yeah, something that they could walk away with, or even something like if there was like a QR code or something that had that local program connection. So yeah, good ideas, things to be thinking about. I'm wondering, Rachel, when you mentioned about the focus has been on the early intervention specialists, those who train them, and you haven't focused yet on the OT, PT, and speech. Is there any, like, what would be, how would that work in your programs? Would that be a different type of an agreement, or is it just something to think about for the future?
It would definitely be a little different. We've
Yeah.
done a little bit of research into it, and from what I've been able to gather, a lot of these programs require affiliation agreements or MOUs for programs to act as rotation or placement sites. So
Okay.
a lot of that is probably going to be more the local programs connecting with universities, but we will be looking into how we can serve as that bridge.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and that's good to know kind of the why that's not in place now. It sounds like it takes different levels of requirement, and it sounds like
Mhm.
the agreement would be more at a local program level to figure out how to make that a place that students could have that placement. So that
Yeah,
makes,
absolutely.
because there's definitely, I saw lots of OTPT speech in the chat, so that's good to know.
And
All
we're
right.
also knowing in their curriculum here in Texas, there's not a lot of pediatrics for the therapies. So that's another thing we want to look into.
Well, that's a good thing to be looking into. I know when you look at, their birth to like the whole lifespan. So to really try to, how can we support the time that they spend, whether if it's a pediatric rotation or one class, how can we help them at least become aware that early intervention is an option? I think that's something I know I've heard folks in our state think about too. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Thank
If you guys
you.
have questions for Rachel, go ahead and pop them into the chat. I don't know, Rachel, Moyer-Trimyer, and Elizabeth, did you guys have anything else to add about what we were chatting about? I saw heads shaking, but I just wanted to check in with you guys before I keep going.
No, I think that again, that's what I've heard as far as student placement, even sometimes for placing students who are majors in human development and family sciences or early childhood education or special education, that the local program would need to have an agreement, a specific agreement with that university to serve as a site where students are earning credit, as university credit, for their experiences on that site.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just chime in. Like at our university, we have the letter of collaboration with ECI, but then for me to place students in a specific entity like Bach or Greater Houston or Katy Project Type, my university has to have an affiliate agreement with that specific entity for them to be approved. And it usually involves like a site visit, what types of an agreement of what types of experiences they will do, what level of oversight. So
Yeah.
I think there's layers to some of these agreements and partnerships.
I think that's really important to understand. I think when Rachel Phillips said the letters of, what is it? The letter of collaboration, I had to look. That's an awareness level letter. Like, let's make sure folks are aware that we want to partner with them, but then the actual partnership piece comes at the local level with those agreements. Now, Elizabeth, I'm wondering, with your experience, I'll tell you, this summer, some programs were able to sign my memorandum of agreement and get back to me, and it was all like, whew, in a couple of weeks. Some, it has been months, and I'm still waiting for it to go through either their system, like their legal system, or my university system. What do you find, Elizabeth? How long of a process is that? Does it vary by program? Because I'm thinking for those that are directors on here, if they want to start establishing those, knowing that this could take months before you get students in your program would be helpful to know.
Yeah, I actually had a practicum student last summer that I tried placing in one, and it was a 8-week summer class, and we were 7 weeks in before she got approved. So we already knew by 3 weeks in that we were going to do a plan B, but we started a month before the practicum started, trying to get her cleared, the background clearance, all of the paperwork. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. We went to another. So, but that's a first, I want to say, that was a very first time that had ever happened. Usually with about a month's headway, I've always been able to get people cleared. But then you're right, because they have to do fingerprinting and they have to do background. They have all of those processes. And if there's a hiccup anywhere in those processes, it can delay it.
Yeah. And I imagine at local level programs, I'm finding in Virginia that sometimes like students go through a university level clearance with the fingerprinting, and then some of our local programs they have to do it again. So they have to have a more recent one or not. So just for you guys, I know we're not here necessarily focusing on student placements, but that's one of the doorways, one of the ways to establish those partnerships and thinking ahead on how to get those parts, and then to how to plan ahead. I know our program directors in our state said, we would love to know if you're thinking you need students in the summer, then we can be planning ahead for who can place them. And also it really was a collaborative partnership to figure out how to make this work. I'm sure you had that too, Elizabeth. Like the better you know the people in the programs and the better that relationship is established between the program and the university, the easier that is. Thank you guys, I appreciate that. Well, let's chat a little bit about some leadership components. So this work from Bruns, I'd mentioned her work before in a previous webinar, but I wanted to just touch base briefly on some competency sets for early intervention leadership. Now, these competency sets don't necessarily focus on recruitment and retention, but we're going to relate them to that, and then we're going to discuss that as a panel. So we've got 5 competency sets here that were developed out of some survey work that Brun did with early intervention leaders, but the leaders included program directors, included mentors, included training and technical assistance folks, like folks from all levels of leadership in early intervention. Professional learning was the first competency set, and I think that relates to not only your job as a director or a supervisor to support the learning, the ongoing professional development of your staff, but also as a leader going, I have always more to learn. And you guys have shown that today by showing up. So I appreciate that. We have effective relationships. We have, which we're talking about today, how to build, not only build them, but also sustain them across time, and how to be able to be responsive to those relationships. Shared responsibility, I think, is a really important one for our discussion today. How do we share responsibility for developing these systems? How do we use data to make sure that we're making data-informed decisions as leaders? And then building effective communication. So for the purpose of our discussion today, there goes my cursor, we're going to kind of hone in on 3 of these competency sets. We're going to hone in on effective relationships, shared responsibility, and effective communication. And we're going to chat about these with our groups. So I wanted to start with shared responsibility because I feel like that lays the foundation for the others. So when Brun talks about effective shared responsibility, her colleagues, they mention it's really defined as engaging with others to make decisions and to build consensus. She also described shared responsibility as having multiple levels. So you guys as directors are already facilitating individual success of your staff. You're definitely monitoring direct services. We're working on a teaming level that often includes that IFSP team, but we can think of an administrative team, whether a team of mentors. We can think about teaming between your local programs and your other community partners and your state level office. Program development is what you guys do a lot of, especially making sure you have a stable program with staff that can see families. And then the last ring is a little light, but that's our compliance ring, making sure that children and families are getting the services that they're entitled to. So let's chat a little bit about these here. I would love for you guys to answer in the chat and let me know, what do you think shared responsibility for expanding the pre-service pipeline and recruitment in Texas should look like? So let me know in the chat, who do you think should be involved in that decision-making and consensus building? Think about your local program, but you can also think broadly across your state. So I'm going to ask you guys to type that into the chat. Stella asks, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? There is a PowerPoint handout, Stella, that has all of this information in it. So we can make sure you get a copy of that, or you're welcome. My email will be at the end. If you don't have a copy, you could email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. But I'm going to toss this out to our panel while you guys are typing into the chat. And let's see, I want to know what we're thinking about, what this should look like. Okay, Angie said she'll send a copy of the PowerPoint. Thank you. So let me toss this out. I guess I'd love to go, Elizabeth, if you don't mind going first. When you think about this as as the university partner, and you think about what would you like to see this look like as a shared responsibility for that pipeline? Because as a faculty, you want your students to eventually be able to work in the field, and your programs certainly want to receive students who are hireable. So who do you think should be involved? What would that look like?
Oh,
I know, big question.
well, it is a big question because with certification and licensing and everything being internal to ECI, it's nuanced versus when we think about pipelines for like ECSE
Yeah.
teachers and stuff in our school. And so I will say, I think I want to recognize that we do have those letters of collaboration. And I think that that's a critical starting point because they have identified which of the universities in Texas offer the coursework necessary for individuals to be to meet the minimum entry requirements into the profession. And so I think a next step, and I think some of that's to come with Rachel, is bringing together some of the program directors and some of these college programs and really systemically looking at how can we better streamline some of this, some of these processes, because they're different. And every university, every relationship has its nuance. So
It's a great idea. I love that, because I kind of thought this year that felt like a next step to me, is to bring the university folks to the table and to really be thinking about how that could work. So thanks for that, Elizabeth. What do you think? Rachel Moyer-Trimyer, you were shaking your head. Do you have any thoughts about like what this should look like? I see folks typing in the chat.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Building on what Elizabeth was saying, definitely, I think universities should be included as a stakeholder in this process, because there are some universities who have classes specifically. They have like UT Austin had a class, Introduction to Early Childhood Intervention, an advanced early childhood intervention class. But there are some universities that don't have a class like that, and so although staff can people who are interested in becoming an early intervention specialist can still, get their pre-service requirements met through your early childhood classes, other early childhood special ed classes. In my experience, most of the students who took the Introduction to Early Childhood Intervention class didn't even know about the ECI program. So I think by having more of a collaboration with the ECI programs, or maybe even guest lecturing in a just early childhood class, that's going to provide more information about ECI in general, just even as a possibility of employment in the future.
Yeah, just it's more at that awareness level, but doing that through that involvement with the classes. I love what you talked about the guest lecturing. Seems like that could be really valuable. I know I love that when you have people actually doing the job or actually directing the programs to come and speak.
I'm just going to jump in and reinforce. I had Lauren Wiggins from the Harris Center in Houston come and presented a class in the spring. And it was an umbrella early childhood special ed. So it covered birth through age 8, ECI and ECSE. And here there were students in this class, but then listening to her share more detail, like opened their eyes to a whole nother level. So I think those partnerships get born and awareness gets born from that directing. But I also feel that there are a lot of faculty and students taking that menu of courses or degrees that it takes to become an ECI that aren't necessarily those professors directly related or themselves knowledgeable.
Yeah.
ECI.
So building that knowledge base so people really know. That's a great point. Rachel Phillips, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I mean, I love it. Sounds like you're really with the work you've been doing, trying to lay the groundwork for some of this.
Yes, this all sounds exactly how I feel. Joanne and Dana saying, all the people that should be involved, state office, programs, university department heads, student advisors. I fully agree. One thing that we've been lacking on those letters is actually connecting with the career services department, which I think would be
Okay.
a really good move. And I
Career
also want to
services at
say,
career services at the university level.
yes. And
Okay.
I've
Okay.
been looking on their websites to see if early intervention is on their list of prospective jobs. So I'm hoping to get it added to that. And then
That would be
also,
great.
Joanne, I'm glad that you are happy that you can email us transcripts.
Good. I see folks are typing in. Crystal said attended a couple of high school career fairs. That's fantastic, Crystal, to start at the high school level. There are some folks that when you look at the research on pipelining say we actually should even start at the middle school level. So you are even, I love it that you're starting even earlier than university. I mean, I definitely didn't know early intervention existed at the middle school level or the high school level or most of college. Like I stumbled into this position. So I love that you're building awareness earlier on. That's fantastic. We have some other comments about who should be involved, local program directors and HR, university programs, ECI state office, lots of folks. Stella says, great idea starting at the high school level. Yeah. And I think Rachel Phillips, you mentioned starting at going to community colleges too. That's a great outreach too. Go ahead, Rachel Moyer. I saw you unmute.
Oh, I was just going to really to kind of piggyback on what Rachel Phillips was saying about the advisors, getting in, making sure the advisors know about the careers at ECI and the classes that would prepare students to have that career. Because a lot of times students go in and they're like, well, I have this degree and I have to take this, I need to find a class that meets this requirement of my degree that fits into my schedule. I don't know what to take. And so the advisors can help provide more information about like, oh, are you interested in this type of work? Are you interested in this type of work? And then like this class would definitely fit into your schedule, and it helps meet your career goals too.
I love that idea. I know in my new position at Old Dominion, I've been building relationships with some of the speech pathology staff and building their knowledge of early intervention as a possibility for the undergraduate students who don't want to go further and get their C's. They're not there maybe in a speech path program, but they're not going to stay there. Going an early intervention route and working as an early childhood interventionist, in my state, that would be okay. Or as a service coordinator, different states have their different qualifications and certification and all, but it was kind of neat to be able to connect with people and they help them think in different ways than maybe they thought before. So it's a great example, Rachel.
Well, I'm sorry. One more thing another thing that Rachel Phillips mentioned was it's in Texas for the PTs and OTs especially. There's not a lot of emphasis put on pediatrics, but maybe getting into some of their bachelor level courses and talking about ECI. So you're putting that idea of working in ECI, really early on in their educational career.
Yeah, and I think sometimes with even just our enthusiasm, because this is kind of an awesome job, like letting people know it's available and how much fun it can be. It can be a real different experience, especially if folks are thinking, I don't know if I want to work in a hospital setting, or I'm not sure I want to be in a clinic all day. Like it's another option out there. Thank you, Rachel. I'm glad you added that. Well, let's keep going and let's think about effective relationships and effective communication. There's kind of an overlap here. Brune suggested that when we're building effective relationships, we want to share having those high standards so we know what each other expects of folks coming in and out of our program. So if we think about students or future hires, we want to make sure those relationships are built in reality, that we both understand the realities of the work. That's a great thing for students, for new hires to get a taste of before they dive in. That those relationships are adaptable, they're responsive, they're grounded in reflective practices so we can work with each other to be making sure we're planning well and working together. And then we're going to think about not only how to build, but also sustain those relationships. So when you guys think about building relationships and sustaining them with your university partners, what do you think you need to build that effective relationship within your, what have you already tried, but also how what do you need? What would you like to see in place? Give us some ideas or share ideas about what you've done. What do you need? What you would like to see happen. You can also think about, I think it's really important within those relationships to share information about the reality of the work, because that helps ground university courses so that we're really teaching about what the work's really like, right? So students know what to expect, how fun it is, but also how messy it can be. And then they're better prepared to come to your programs as future employees. So let me know, what do you guys think? What do you need to be in place to build and to sustain those effective relationships within your network? Like, do you just need more universities to reach out to? Maybe you're in one of those rural areas that Rachel mentioned. Maybe do you want to develop your own flyer for your program level flyer that you could give out or add information to what Rachel's going to be sending out for the recruitment flyer? Like, what would help you build those relationships? Let us know in the chat. And let's see, I guess I'm going to toss this one. Let's see, Rachel Phillips, do you have any ideas when you think about building and sustaining relationships? Any recommendations or thoughts after you've got that letter of collaboration in place? What happens then, or what would you recommend to local programs then? Like, did the local programs, is there a place, maybe it's on the map that was on that thing, where they would know these are the universities that we have letters with, so we could reach out to them to start establishing relationships?
Absolutely. So on page 2 of that map, it actually lists out the contacts for all of the universities, or our primary contact. One thing that we at the state office plan on working on is enhancing those relationships, and also just making sure we are constantly keeping it updated, because
Okay.
faculty come and go. We want to make sure that it's the correct contact. And I would say once that letter is established, just reaching out to the contact to see what kind of relationship can be established. And
Awesome. Thank
hopefully
you.
as we move forward, we can build that.
Yeah, keep thinking about that. Thanks, Rachel. So Elizabeth, I'm curious, I know you had mentioned before some of the things that you have done to establish some of those relationships from the opposite side, from the university person. How did that start? Did the programs reach out to you? Did your university reach out to the programs? What kind of things has worked for relationship building at your university?
I'll be honest with you, two of the relationships or connections I have are actually through alumni of my university.
Okay.
And so that connection, actually, they graduated, they worked, and then they worked their way up. That connection became a critical a critical piece. And then one of my other partnerships previously that's not currently active, we actually met at an event kind of like this. It was like a conference style event through our regional service center. And I was like, huh. And she was like, huh. But then it's following up. So in those relationships, like with one of our entities, we first got involved because I offered to have students volunteer at some of their family events.
Okay.
And so it was like, hey, my students have a service learning requirement in the course. What kind of events do you have that maybe I can send students to engage, just as a reciprocal for the students to get some of that real world ECI, experience, interact with children, family, therapists, practitioners, but also let them kind of see us and get to know us as an institution.
I love that idea of the back and forth of that kind of relationship. So it's sort of not just the what's in it for me, but what can I offer to you? I was talking with another colleague who's at university, I think in Kentucky, recently about this kind of stuff. And she said one of the things she does is she called them, like, I can't remember if she called them professional development schools or something like that, where she develops a relationship with the local program, or this, whether I think in her state, the EI must be under schools. And she said, I want to place my students with them, but I also she offered to do professional development for like once a year for that school or that program. And it was kind of a nice give and take. Now that depends on both sides, needs and availability, but it was kind of a nice way to not just do this is what I need, but also how can we work together and sustain that relationship over time. So that's a good example of that, Elizabeth. Thank you. You guys feel free to drop into the chat if these are things you've done or you have questions about how these would work. Let us know. Go ahead, Rachel Moyer-Trimyer. What were you thinking about this? How might this work from your perspective?
As far as the second question, how can they help the recruitment partners, specifically universities, understand the realities of working in early childhood intervention? I think anytime you can share videos of what an early intervention coaching visit looks like is fantastic, because again, a lot of my students had no idea what early childhood intervention was. And if they were familiar with, quote, therapy, it was typically, they had an idea of like a therapy visit in a clinic or therapy visit in a hospital setting. So they weren't as familiar as with the coaching method of providing early childhood intervention services and the partnership between the providers and the family. I'm using the team approach, interdisciplinary approach. So anytime you can show that in a video is fantastic. I think the ability to have students go on a home visit, it's even better, but I know there are a lot of restrictions around that. So the videos are a great alternative.
But yeah, that's a fantastic idea. We had talked, I think it was maybe last summer, Rachel, about on another webinar about, having your staff film like a day in the life of an early interventionist, or even just to chat just directly to their phone. This is what it's like. Any of those little tidbits, I think they energize students for wanting to seek this out as a profession when they can hear those kind of voices and see those examples. So that's a fantastic idea. Thank you. You guys feel free to type. As I said, your questions in the chat. I'll keep us moving. Oh, Roxanne says, I provided a presentation to new OT students at our local university about everything ECI. That's a fantastic, Roxanne. Did you get invited to do that, or did you reach out to that university and offer? Let us know. Oh, she said, yes, she's alumni, kind of like Elizabeth was saying. So got that connection there. That's autumn. And she was invited. Fantastic. See, I think, and those are those little connections that often can expand into big connections. So that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that, Roxanne. So our last, oh wow, our time has flown by. I just realized what time it is. So I'm going to move us along. Our last area was effective communication. And I think we've kind of talked about this one already, kind of within what we were talking about. So if you guys have additional ideas for enhancing communication, and in particular, the last question there, how do we support universities in preparing students with hireable skills? I think that's really important because we want to make sure they know what it's about. We have those connections in place for placements and for sharing support. But what do you guys need as program directors from your university partners so that students are hireable? Let us know what you're thinking in the chat. And I'll toss it out to my panel. What do you guys think when you think about helping make sure students are hireable? What's on your radar? I guess, Rachel Moyer-Trimyer, do you want to let us know when you were thinking about your intro level class? That's often the intro to the work, but what do you think would be really important to help students make that transition from just an introduction to this is really a field I want to go into?
Well, definitely stressing the ability to be, the students need to have the ability to be flexible, to be culturally competent, to have those active listening skills. Again, it's a team environment. So, really all of those concepts were stressed, throughout the entire semester. The key principles were stressed throughout the entire semester. So again, just the DEC, of course, connecting them to DEC, connecting them to just making sure that they have that broad understanding and really understanding how ECI is different than maybe other therapy settings that they may be familiar with.
Great point. Great point. I'm mindful of our time, and I want to make sure we get to the pipeline part of this, what's going to happen next. So Elizabeth, did you have something you wanted to add before I jump to the next one? No. Okay. I just saw you shaking your head. I think you're agreeing with what Rachel said.
And I was agreeing with what Joanne said, because I think a big difference is they're just not prepared for all the organization. Like they might understand child development and they might grasp a little bit family systems perspectives and practices, but it's how to juggle it all is a big yeah, and be independent. Joanne, you should be chiming in.
Yeah, there's a lot. It is a lot. It's a lot to juggle. It's not a, it's such a, it's like complex, but in a good way, this kind of a job, multiple families, multiple places to go, multiple team members to work with. There is a lot to stay organized and to be expected to be independent around too. Yeah. Rachel says talking with the case notes, other paperwork. Stella says ongoing collaboration, presentations, one time per semester from spring targeting education students. Okay. ECI presentation once for your targeting PT graduates. We're allowed to present for graduating PTs a few months prior. That's fantastic, Stella. You've got a couple of things in place there for OTs and PTs. That's awesome. And I'm wondering if you guys have some of these presentations and you're willing to share them so people in other parts of the state could present, you know, for their local universities. These might be resources to share across the state if one person has developed those. So, you know, if you're in a different part of the state and you think, oh, Stella's done that and I need to do that, reach out to each other and share the resources. Thanks, Stella. She says, absolutely. All right, so I'm going to turn this back over to Rachel so she can let you know what's in the pipeline to keep this conversation going.
Absolutely. And I'll try to be mindful of time. So if you want to send me an email to get more information afterwards, feel free to. So the first one is we are looking to develop some stakeholder groups to plan and to enhance our existing relationships. So one of the things we're going to be doing here in the fall, hopefully, is reviewing curriculum and coursework that's related to EIS credentialing. And that would be with university faculty, ECI programs, and state office staff. We also want to work with some of the local ECI programs who have successful relationships with the therapy programs to share best practices and strategies on how they connect with those universities. We're also looking to enhance those collaborations. So one thing some of you might be familiar with, I know Rachel Moyer-Trimyer is the university IPDP progress trackers. So we can provide students with the opportunity to connect their coursework to initial training requirements. And so that would be something very helpful to just prepare professionals. We're also looking to connect with community colleges and colleges outside of Texas, as I mentioned earlier. We also want to be more proactive with our presentations. And so, as you guys were saying, we would love to start reaching out to universities on a regular basis just to say, hey, we're available. We have a contractor in your area. Let's do this. And hopefully, we can always include field staff. And we do want to try to create just a basic presentation for all of the different licensures. That way it'll be, you know, helpful moving forward.
That would be great, Rachel. Would that, your basic presentation, be something that would be available that program directors could use and adapt for their programs? Like it would
That's
be
what we're hoping.
Publicly available. Okay. That would be great. Sometimes it would save some of the work, the local level
right.
work.
And
I'm
if
sure,
the
like
local
Stella, you probably worked
programs
hard to get those presentations together for the OTs and PTs. So if somebody has like a base together, that makes it a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Great idea. I saw Zeta had to leave. Well, I wanted to thank you for that, Rachel. So you guys have some things coming down the pipeline. I hope you'll reach out to Rachel if these are things you would like to be participating in, or, you know, you have thoughts about that. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll put our emails up in just a second, but it sounds like we've got some work underway to keep this conversation going, which is really my goal with this work too. So I'm trying to be mindful of the time. It's about 12:01 here on the East Coast, so I know we're about a minute over. We do have, I could certainly hang out if you have other thoughts and questions. I want to make sure thanks, Angie. Make sure you fill out the post survey. So if you can take a moment to do that before you leave, that would be fantastic. We'd love to get that feedback. And that link is in the chat. I'll also pull up our emails. So you're welcome to reach out to us if you have additional questions or thoughts that you want to share, things that you need to be in place to make these relationships work better, to build your network, to widen your network. we would love to continue to have your feedback. So if any of us receives that, we'll certainly share it with the group, and keep that conversation going. I will keep an eye on the chat a little bit. I love this final quote though. Coming together is the beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. So I think this is a great example. That quote fits this kind of work. It's not work that's done. Even when you have a good relationship, it takes time and cultivation and thinking of ways to keep it on your mind so that you can keep building and maintaining those relationships, and make sure your network is well connected, especially with the changes that we all know happen across early intervention. So with that, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. If anybody wants to unmute, if that's an easier way to ask your question, you're welcome to do that. And if Rachel, and Elizabeth have a moment, we could stay on for just 1 or 2 more minutes in case folks have questions.
Well, just on behalf of the ECI grant team, I want to thank everybody for being here today and taking time out of your busy Monday mornings. Dana, thank you so much for putting the panel together. And of course, Rachel, both Rachels and Elizabeth, thank you for participating again. We are keeping our fingers crossed that the work will continue, and we are still on hold, but we have one more session, Angie, next week, right? With Elizabeth Bruder, Dr. Bruder will be on, and we look forward to seeing everybody, and we'll keep you posted.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. If you guys have questions, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, we'll just watch for the chat. You're welcome.
And all of this will be posted again also on our website. So it will, the presentation will be there, and that's always a great resource for all the work we've been doing together.
Awesome. Yeah, and if you guys